Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. When we talk about Afrofuturism, so often people talk about the art, the writing, other forms of expression. But we also talk about what will life look like for Black folks in the future. And today's guest, we're going to be talking about Black people in the future when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to Black people's interaction with the legal system. And I know that, given all that's taking place in Memphis and other parts of the country, this is an ongoing conversation. But today we have Tajuana B. Johnson. And Tajuana B. Johnson is one of the lead attorneys of AFJ's Legal Support Unit. Tajuana has been a legal practitioner for over 10 years and has honed her skills in a variety of practice areas. She was born and raised in New York City and knows firsthand the experience of having family members caught in the criminal justice system and supporting loved ones through lengthy periods of incarceration. Having spent her early years in Far Rockaway, Queens, and her formative years growing up in Brooklyn, Tajuana has personally witnessed and has been touched by the ways in which economic disenfranchisement, the influx of drugs, and the prison industrial complex ravages communities. Prior to joining AFJ, Tajuana served as an adjunct clinical professor at the City University of New York School of Law. Tajuana is a writer, and she has appeared on a number of panels and media broadcasts. She is also a requested speaker at various forums. Tajuana serves as a mentor to new attorneys and other young professionals, as well as a number of young people across New York City. And with that, we'd like to welcome Tajuana B. Johnson to Into the Afroverse. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me. As I've been calling you for over 2 decades now, Brother Will. Thanks for having me on your show.
No, I appreciate you coming. And yeah, we go back a ways. So I just really have been impressed with your growth and seeing what you've been doing for the community in so many areas. Law is just your latest, if you will, foray as far as helping the community. Let's get right to it.
Well, before you do that,
please, go ahead.
I just want to give you a little flowers here.
Oh, thank you.
And say that, in my early years when I was lost and trying to find my way, which I think we're always trying to find our way, but I was lucky enough to meet you and call you a friend. And a lot of the things that I think about and the work that I do, the encounters that I have, are always influenced by early conversations and ciphers that we had. So you have made an indelible mark on my life, and I'm sure so many others. Yeah, that's real.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Wow. So in terms of your work and in terms of your practice, in terms of law and so forth, how did you end up where you are?
So I was born in New York City. People always tell me I was born in, but I think where I was born is really important because I was born in New York City in a housing project. And I thought that the rest of the world looked like that. I thought that that's what the rest of the world looked like. My sort of, immediate surroundings was a microcosm. I went to school a block away from where I lived. All of the shopping centers and stuff that my mother would take us to was, within a block or two. Folks in Far Rockaway are an intimate group in that people marry into each other's families and create a sense of community in that way, or at least it was back, a million years ago when I was born. And so I saw that as the larger world. And once I realized that it wasn't, I went to school, I was in some program where a lot of non-Black and brown, white students were bussed in, right? Gifted program. Right. And so if I'm not going to spend money on private school, then the next best thing is to send my kid to a public school where there's a quote unquote gifted program. And so these were white kids sort of coming into my neighborhood school, but in a specific program. And through them, what I started to realize was this ain't it. Like there's a whole other world that's happening and I have no clue. Like I'm not clued in. Hence, I started to understand privilege.
Right.
So my life was sort of like two lives, right? Two realities, right? Like Brother Du Bois. I would go to school and I would see one world, and then I would get out of school, I would walk across the street and I would see something completely different. And I didn't understand why the what was going on across the street looked completely different what was going on in the school. And I think that was my earliest inkling that I had a gift, not for anything more than seeing a thing, right? Seeing a thing, like James Baldwin said, witnessing a thing. So I think early on I was a witness. I wanted to be a writer. I went to school to do that. Um, the world early on taught me that the world that I was in early on taught me that that wasn't an option, right? And so then I became a teacher, a substitute teacher, in the same neighborhood where I grew up. I had gone away and left and gone to college, and came back to the neighborhood and became a substitute teacher in the same neighborhood. I mean, yeah, the same neighborhood where I grew up. And then a few months later, became a full-on special education teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And up until then, I really didn't understand the pipeline. I didn't realize what was about to happen, right? What I was about to become a part of the problem. Because when you teach kids who are special education, there's an IEP created, right? An individualized education program. And that program back then was being used, I understood later, to basically forecast what jail should look like, right? What prison should look like. And so writing those IEPs for what were now kids of people that I grew up with, I hadn't yet fully understood that I was creating a destiny for them. Right. And so upon realizing that, I left that position disillusioned, went to a high school in Manhattan and bumped into an ill brother and an ill sister. Shout out to Rashida Hilliard and you, and just started to really like vibe about the things we were seeing at that time, right? It was the turn of the century. I'm dating us. And we had all had our own specific experiences. And then we were smack dab in the middle of 9/11. We hadn't been teaching at the school very long when the buildings around us actually fell, right? And a lot of people say that's when the world changed. But what we knew was that our world had been destroyed like those buildings years and years and years ago.
Wow.
And so we tapped into, I believe, we tapped into what people do in traumatic experiences like that, because now this was the world's traumatic experience, but it was mirroring what we had been dealing with in our own lives and in our own communities. And so we had a firsthand sort of look at what do they do? Like what happens when there's trauma? And then figured out how to take that now and hopefully apply it to our lives and the people in our families and communities that were being affected. So I left that teaching position with a plan and a law school acceptance and probably about $10 in my pocket. Went to law school, did a lot of work, did a lot of traveling, did a lot of, sort of taking it apart and putting it together. And then went right back to kids. Started representing kids and juveniles in the criminal justice system. And that just really blew my mind in ways that I thought I understood, but didn't. After that, some time there, then I moved on to representing adults. I went to Manhattan Supreme Court, which is the sort of, I guess it's the center. New York is the center of the world, they say. And then Manhattan, New York County Supreme Court is the center of all legal, criminal, civil spaces. Like they forecast what happens around the country and around the world in a lot of ways. And so being there, continuing to learn and grow and be heartbroken, and disillusioned and get back up and dust it off and keep fighting. I represented, I was counting recently, I would say thousands of people in New York City, both as a juvenile family court lawyer and as a adult defense lawyer, for the better span of 10 years.
Okay.
Left that job, and my current position is with the Alliance of Families for Justice. It's on the other side, right? So what would happen as a defense attorney is you represent people, and then they if you do it as well as you would like, not always, it's not always done badly, but if you
Right.
do it as well as you would like, because this is the representation isn't about guilt and innocence. Like I had to learn that quickly, right?
Right.
None of this is really about guilt and innocence or what guilt and innocence actually means. I say that to say, if a person is guilty of stealing, a pregnant mother is guilty of stealing toothpaste and underwear and feminine products from a Dwayne Reed, well, then everything that came before that is just as guilty, if not more guilty. And so, and that wasn't every case, right? Like
Right.
I'm
Right.
not one of those public defense attorneys. Everybody, was just innocent or downtrodden, or, you know, they weren't responsible for their actions.
Right.
I'm just, I'm just, I'm just of the belief that a lot of actions in the criminal justice system are precipitated by other actions on the part of the state,
Mhm.
and the state being, all forms of government, and that those things were rarely at my time and still aren't um, sort of investigated in a real way to create what the criminal justice system is supposedly designed to do, right? Which
Right.
is to rehabilitate. It's just not designed to do that. I mean, and that's common knowledge these days. But
Mhm.
more importantly, the things that get you to court are never really taken apart and put together as much as they should be. There's been some progress. They have drug courts and other things, but even in those areas, there's politics and
Right.
money, right?
Right.
Politics and money and race, quite frankly. But moving forward, at the work that I do now at AFJ, just quickly, is on the other side of that. You're an attorney. If you do your work and you do it in a way that you feel successful, your client doesn't go to jail.
Gotcha.
Period. Period. But if they
Right.
do and they get some years, now they're in prison, and that's a whole other system, right? And as much as lawyers will profess to know what that looks like, until you've gone in there and you actually sat down face to face and you talked to people and their families in the way that myself and my business partner, shout out to Quasi Dash, who is my business partner, my best friend, and just my comrade, my soldier, all those things. We walked through this space together as lawyers who have been doing the public interest work and various other things. He was a community lawyer. So we've been doing a lot of things, but this prison terrain, we thought we understood until we got there. And then we
Mhm.
realized that there was a whole other space there that we hadn't yet mined.
Right.
And so this is that. That's what we do now. We basically fight for the human rights of folks that are incarcerated. And what Quasi always says is, you were sentenced by a judge to be here. That's what he'll say to our clients. There is talk across the country about abolition of prisons, and there are people on both sides of that conversation. But your reality right now is you're here. So we don't waste time really talking about, in those instances, whether or not a prison should exist. We do that
Right.
in our outside work, but right now we're looking at you, brother or sister, and you're behind the wall. You were
Gotcha.
sentenced by a judge to do time, but you weren't sentenced to be beaten. You weren't sentenced to be starved. You weren't sentenced to be deprived of community and family. And you weren't sentenced to be killed and raped and maimed at the hands of the state. And
Right.
so if those rights are being violated, then we, along with our team at the legal support unit, step in and try to assist and hopefully mitigate the damages of those experiences, both for our clients and their families. So that's where I am. That's how I got here. It was long-winded, I
No,
know,
it's fine. It's
but
fine.
it was an interesting trajectory for me, looking back at it and then looking where I am now and realizing that there's so much that I still don't know. There's so much that I still
Right.
don't understand.
Excellent. Well, if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. We're taking Black folks into the future here on WOL 1450 AM. Uh, and we're talking with Tajuana Johnson, attorney Tajuana Johnson, and her work. Before I get with my next question, how can folks reach you? How can they get in touch with
The Alliance for Families for Justice has a website, and all of the contact information is there. The website is AFJ, Alliance of Families for Justice -NY.org. So AFJ-NY.org. All of the contact information is there.
Great, thank you. What is it, like you're talking about being disillusioned, you talk about the things that you've learned. What is it that us on the outside that are not aware of the inner workings of the legal system or the prison system, what do you think would be like the top thing or things we're not getting, that we're not understanding, that you would like to share with us?
Well, I don't want to be presumptuous and think that I know any more than anyone else. So I don't know what people aren't getting, but what I will say is some of the things, what I will talk about is some of the things that I learned early on and are still prevalent. I still have to remind myself throughout now 15 years of practicing, law and doing this work. None of this is what they say it's about. None of this is about guilt and innocence. None of this is about that. My family has been the victim, quote unquote, of crime, right? I have cousins who were shot and killed as young men. I have a cousin who predated me. I think I may have been a toddler, who was killed at Elmira Correctional Facility under the guise of he just had a seizure. My aunt's only child broke her heart, ruined her life because she understood that her son had never been, seizures had never been a part of his medical history. That had never been anything that she had known about in all of his life. And then just to digress a little bit, now on the other side of it, talk to mothers who tell me, I was sitting in my living room one Sunday morning and I got a phone call. They asked me, "Are you the mother of X?" I said, "Yes." They said, "Well, X has passed away and we're going to bury him tomorrow. You can come and pick up his belongings." And so when these women reach out to me, what it does is it triggers what my aunt was feeling in that moment, which is this prison was designed to do exactly what it does, which is to destroy lives. Now, whether you believe in guilt, the person is guilty or innocent is another conversation. And I'm not suggesting that people don't want some sort of reparation for what's happened to them and their family if they've been victimized by crime, right? I understand that. I completely get that. My family and myself, I mean, I could go down the list of kids whose Pampers I've changed in my family who are no longer with us because of some random bullet, right? And I mean, it's a list. It's not one. But what I will say is that this system was never designed to provide you with any reparations for that or repair any of that, right? And so there's questions about how we can revise that to make sure that we as people who are victimized get some kind of repair, some kind of maybe even financial gain or some sense of vindication, right? After someone has been killed. This family, Tyree Nichols' family, they're absolutely right to want justice, right? They're absolutely right to say my child has been killed or my loved one has been killed and someone should pay. So I'm not, I am mindful of that. And I'm in no way sort of putting that on the back burner. That is paramount. But I think what I have learned and what I think some people may not understand and many might is that this system isn't where you get any of that.
Got you.
It just isn't where you get any of that. So in destroying it and rebuilding, we have to take all of that into account and try and figure out, okay, well, how do we get the things that we need, right? In terms of what a lot of people are calling restorative justice now. How do we get that in a way that we feel like we've been, like I said, repaired and vindicated, and our needs have been met, emotional, physical, and financial, after something terrible has happened to someone in our family. But that this system, none of it will ever give you that.
Right. Wow. Now, let me ask you this, and once again, in keeping with the theme of what we talk about here, we talk about the future a lot. And that's really, like I said, what Afrofuturism is all about. Based on what you're seeing today in terms of the Black community and its interactions with the legal system and the prison system, and am I correct in making sure that I'm distancing those two?
Yes.
Okay, because a
Yes.
lot of times
Yes.
folks will kind of like cross them over. So first, let's be clear. For you, when you hear legal system versus the prison system, what's the distinction for you?
They're brother and sister, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
born of the same mother, and I could get into what all that entails, which is racism and capitalism and all the isms. But they're born of the same mother. They're brother and sister, evil twins, if you will.
Right.
But they are distinct in that for example, we have seen a ton of camera video now of how um brothers and sisters are being beaten and choked to death and shot in the streets. I mean, by police officers. We're
Right.
seeing this, um, you know, every day. Something
Mm-hmm.
you and I talked about, and you made this very salient point. You said, but we always had the video. The
Right.
cameras are just they're just more, the technology has improved and the
Right.
cameras are just more accessible, but we've always had the video. However, people are seeing it now, I guess, in ways that um are more prevalent than before, right?
Right.
And so we see that often. What we don't see is the same forces doing that to incarcerated people.
Okay.
We don't see that on TV. There's no camera footage of that, right? So we're not seeing
Right.
that every day. So what happens is incarcerated people, they, in our minds, I believe, they inhabit a different space,
Right.
right? There's been instances where people who have been the families of victims have sat down to talk with the people who are incarcerated and heard of what their life looked like afterward. And what a lot of people think they'll feel is, well, that's what you deserve, right? That's what you
Right.
get.
Right.
Kill my brother. You did that to my sister. That's what you deserve. And those conversations have now turned those families of the victim, right? And when I
Mm-hmm.
say victim, I use it kind of loosely because in a lot of ways, we're all victims, but that's a different conversation.
Right.
I'm giving specific accountability to the person who has taken a life or done something terrible to someone's loved one. That
Right.
family, they're the victims, right?
Right.
That family member has sat down with them and then become a proponent of the work that I do, which is to
Gotcha.
eradicate all these human rights abuses in the prison system, right?
Right.
And so what I don't think people to distinguish the two is that what's happening in the prison system is unknown. I've had family members who are incarcerated tell me horrible stories, but they held something back. They couldn't tell me or their mother or their aunt or my grandmother what really happened.
Right.
I mean, I don't like to engage in this sort of traumatic and oppression porn, they call it now, where you
Mm-hmm.
tell these really horrible stories to get people's attention. But I
Right.
mean, I remember I was on the phone with a brother during the pandemic who was incarcerated, and he was saying to me that he was so thirsty and they hadn't given him anything to drink in so many days that he drank his own urine.
Oh my goodness.
That's not unheard of, and that's common practice. I mean,
Wow.
you as a defense attorney on the legal side, I would know that. As
Right.
somebody who has represented people for years and years and years, I didn't know that. As somebody who has had family incarcerated for long bids of time, never heard of that.
Right.
Now, I've heard of other specific horrible instances, but that stands out to me because that to me was an example of things that people wouldn't hone in on when you're thinking about incarcerated people, because they inhabit a different space in your brain or in your spirit. But if
Right.
somebody videoed that, and put that on TV, and that's
Exactly.
not even the most horrible, right? That's just
Right.
me being right. Somebody videoed that and put that on TV. What kinds of reaction would it garner in the same way that it has garnered the other horrific things that we've seen?
And you know the thing is, if anything, they've done the exact opposite. We've made incarceration a humorous thing. You know,
Yes.
oftentimes
Yeah.
you will see
Yeah.
jokes about
Oh, so good.
people being
Yes.
raped in
Mm-hmm.
prison. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that just becomes part of the way, I guess, we are desensitized to
Yes.
what happens to people that are incarcerated. And as you stated, you know, paying for a crime is one thing, but when you add this level of brutality to it and inhumanity, now you've moved it to another space. So I totally get your point. And like I said, I've come to realize that, you know, the way we've been shown, and you see films based on prison many times, you know, it's done in a comedic sense. And the only times we really hear about the horrors of incarceration is when we're talking about other countries, as
You know,
opposed to talking about the US.
it's always such an illuminating conversation with you on and off the air, right?
Right,
Because this just reminds me of, you know, who we were back in
right,
our 20s. I lob something your way, you take
right.
it, you grab the ball, you shoot it back to me, and you say, and this, right? And
Right.
and learning and growing in that way is always my fondest memories of hanging out with you and Sheed, aka Scoop,
Right,
right? And it's so true. You know, I am guilty of some of those things,
right.
right? We're
Exactly.
conditioned. We grew up in a certain way. We grew up in a certain place here in New York City. And so, you know, we used to say back in the day, we would say, yo, you know what I'm saying? He was up north.
Right,
But a lot of times when folks came back from up north, we gave them uh or they learned to depend on an identity that really wasn't good for them or the community, right?
that's cool. Yeah,
Which is, I went through all of this, so that makes me a soldier.
right,
You know what I'm saying? And they would implicitly um corroborate what later became this sort of image or definition. And then that's the
right,
same thing that's used now as part of the humor. And
right,
all of it was all of it was meant or did further tear us down, you know?
right.
Myself being when I say implicit, I meant to say complicit, right?
Mhm.
Myself being complicit in it as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's just a way to get us, like you said, to participate in it, to
Yes.
perpetuate it, and
Yes.
to continue it. So that's
Absolutely.
something that, if nothing else, that folks are listening, I want us to be more aware, more cognizant of the role that we may be playing in keeping this system going in the way
Yeah.
that's been going. You know, in as much as we want to criticize it, in as much as we want to tear it down and rebuild it, we also have to be aware of the role that we're playing in keeping it going. So thank you for that conversation. Um,
One of
mhm.
not to
No,
interject
please,
here,
please
but
go,
I would
go.
be remiss if I didn't say this. One of the most prolific things that you ever said to me, and you can line all my friends and uh family members in a room, and they'll all tell you that I live by this. One of the things that you said to me, and sometimes I don't even think you remembered you said this, but you said, you dropped this on me. You said racism and white supremacy and all of these ills will never go away as long as we are both dependent, complicit, and a part of it.
Right.
And at the time, I didn't grasp that. You know, I was 20 something years old. I just, you know, I wanted a Gucci pair of shades,
Right.
right? Not that I don't want some nice shades now, not Gucci, but you know,
Right.
I was I was caught up in what I was seeing and juxtaposing that constantly with what I look like and how I present it. And
Right.
that's still an ongoing struggle of mine. But more importantly, when you said that to me, I was like, I'm not complicit in this. I'm not dependent on this. Like, with what?
Right.
And many years later, I still go back to that. So everything that you just said is sort of rooted in
Right.
what we discussed all those years ago when you said that to me, is that this stuff won't ever be dismantled, as long as we are all a part of it. And that's not to point fingers at us,
Right.
or not give us some grace. I mean, we are we're at the bottom of all
Right.
of it.
Right.
But it's certainly worth recognizing every day. But continue. You about to say something else.
Yeah, well, I want to, first of all, invite you to come back because believe it or not, we're up against it. The conversation is so great. It went so quickly. And I'm sure folks want to hear some more from you. So will you come back to do another segment or two with us? That's my first question.
Anytime, brother.
Excellent.
For you, you already know. And
I
for the
appreciate
folks too, but for you,
it.
you know.
I appreciate it. So one more time, ladies and gents, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. We're taking Black folks into the future. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, you can hear past episodes. If you missed this episode, you can hear it on the Afrofuturism Network YouTube page. And also check us out on Afrofuturism Network on various social media such as Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So one more time, thank you for tuning in today into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones, and a special shout out to Mr. Duke Productions for producing today's episode. Thank you and have a good day.